Welcome. Zest here. The inconvenient truth about Hiroshima. General Sams did an extensive interview of Hiroshima survivors. Sam's boots-on-the-ground research told a different story. Those infamous instant death counts, 70,000, 80,000, even 100,000 vaporized in a flash. What our general discovered through actual investigation rather contradicted the promotional materials. As he reported, when the bomb went off, about 2,000 people out of 250,000 got killed, by blast, by thermal radiation, or by intense X-ray gamma radiation. Then, what happened is like an earthquake. The blast knocked down houses. Hibachis had turned over and started fires. When you have an earthquake or an atomic bomb, you start fires, and then people are trapped in the buildings. And again, by endless interviews, where were you? Where was your great-uncle? Where was Grandma when this occurred? We built up the evidence to show on a cookie-cutter basis that it took about 36 hours for about 2/3 of that town to burn. So there you go. Only 2,000 people out of 250,000 got killed at the onset. A far cry from the official numbers claimed today, 2025, of 70,000 to 80,000 people killed instantly. The real carnage came from that most ancient and democratic of disasters, fire. Not some atomic flash of science fiction, but the same tedious, methodical conflagration that had been consuming cities since humans first learned to knock things over and leave the stove on. The art of propaganda believing its own lies. Sams had the misfortune to witness the birth of a magnificent delusion. The planned lies are shown for what they are. You see, it wasn't bang like the publicity here said. A bomb went off and a city disappeared. No such thing happened. That was the propaganda for deterrent. They're talking about after that. One bomb and away goes Chicago, you know? All you've got to do is look in Life magazine and whatnot back in 45, 46, and so on. What I'm trying to do is to show how it's like end the war with one B-17. What you have to keep your feet on the ground. As near as we could figure then, about 21,000 people died in 36 hours as a result of being trapped and burned and so on. It's like those who died in the 23 earthquake and subsequent fire. Then, as I say, I set the 6 months deadline for anybody who had been there, even though they went away and so on, to put a deadline on deaths from delayed radiation effects, as far as it takes 6 months or so for deaths from, what do they call it? Delayed effects. His resounding conclusion. As near as we could figure then, about 21,000 people died in 36 hours as a result of being trapped and burned and so on. 21,000, infinitesimal to today's 2025 official tally of 90,000 to 166,000 deaths. The numbers game became even more creative when local clergy got involved as a priest pitched in with theatrical estimates. One of us, Norman Trenton somebody, got a priest there to say he guessed 100,000 people died when the bomb went off. Well, you see, it didn't. There never was 100,000 people died. I recall the figures to the ultimate. 6 months deaths from untreated burns, thermal burns. They didn't have any drugs or anything else. The homecoming reality check. Returning to America, our general experienced that peculiar culture shock reserved for those who've seen the gap between reality and marketing. Sams was stunned to find military planners believing these mendaciously inflated numbers. He ridiculed the atom bomb's effectiveness, despite all the hoopla of its efficiency, as an awesome and almighty weapon of mass destruction, assuming it was real. When I came back to this country, I was appalled from a military standpoint to find that our major planners in the War Department were using their own propaganda. 100,000 deaths. Bing! And they were comparing it, saying it was the greatest killer in comparing it to the number of deaths in Tokyo, which had been literally destroyed by high explosives. Actually, the atomic bomb was a damn poor killer in comparison to the exposed population. His advice to the top brass carried the resigned realism of one who'd seen the strings on puppets. I used to tell them back in the general staff and so on, and including the chief of staff, I believe if you can deter a war, for God's sake, let's do it, and blow up the effects all you want. But don't believe your own propaganda if you are applying it to your military planning. Radiation hysteria spreads to America. Radiation panic became a national pastime. SAMS tried to set the record straight. Unfortunately, we created such hysteria in this country that the mere mention of radiation or thermal nuclear power or a couple of millirems of radiation and you have a hysteria. So this is a fact. Actually, atomic bomb was a poor killer. On the subject of leukemia, that great atomic boogeyman, our general delivered a lesson in precision. Whenever you talk about leukemia and radiation, I get a little irritated because they say, oh, everybody's gonna die of leukemia from radiation. Leukemia in the population, it increases with age. I have said nobody ever proved that leukemia was ever caused by radiation. Because what happened in Hiroshima, this was the big thing everybody was looking for. What radiation does is trigger, not cause leukemia. You talk to people here on the faculty, and they don't know this. You hear about this propaganda about the radiation down here and at Pennsylvania. It won't cause leukemia. All it does is trigger at an earlier date what was already going to happen. That's a very interesting thing, and unknown to a lot of radiologists. They don't teach this in medical school. It was certainly an eye-opener to me when we got that report done. The general's final wisdom. Even decades later, SAMS lamented the cost of fear-mongering. By 1979, looking back on his role in the great atomic theater, SAMS offered this confession. So you have to get your facts and keep them in mind and not let hysteria take over. We're still paying for that hysteria following the atomic bomb, which is deliberately blown up for a very good reason, and which I participated in accordance with policy of the government. Could SAMS have refused? Yes and no. He could have said no to magnifying the atom bomb threat and dangers of radiation. He could have resigned. To stay, he had to play along. To leave meant abandoning millions to disease and starvation. Instead, a Faustian pact with an unsavory post-war global agenda was formed. He chose to stay, patching wounds, while the propaganda machine polished its doomsday story. General SAMS retired in July 1955 after 33 years in the U.S. Army. There appears to be a hint of irony in his retirement speech. To me, the highlight of such a career has been helping to rebuild a destroyed nation and to establish health and welfare programs so that they can know that literally their lives are worth saving and that this very essence of our concept of democracy is more desirable than the promises of the dictatorships of the welfare or socialist state, where the individual is nothing and the welfare of the state is of primary importance. Sadly, American democracy's greatest post-war export was not peace or health. It was fear, wrapped in mushroom cloud mythology and sold wholesale to the world. And so we salute Brigadier General Crawford F. SAMS, honest soldier, competent administrator, and accidental philosopher of the gap between what we say happened and what actually did. In a world that increasingly resembles a theatrical production where everyone has forgotten their acting, his clarity was both a gift and a burden. The clarity to see that the Emperor's new atomic clothes were, in many respects, precisely as advertised, a magnificent fiction that everyone agreed to believe. The real wisdom in Sam's tale lies not merely in his revelations about the atomic bomb, but in his recognition that we inevitably become prisoners of our own mythology. Each generation discovers new sources of cosmic dread and proceeds to inflate them beyond all proportion, like children blowing soap bubbles that grow larger and more fragile until they inevitably pop, only to begin blowing new ones immediately thereafter. General Sam's reluctant legacy? A man who healed a nation's body while his own government inflated its ghost stories. The final tally. Immediate blast deaths, 2,000, not 70,000. Total deaths, mostly fire, 21,000, not 90,000 to 166,000. Radiation fatalities, bureaucratically inflated, and most likely none. True power of the bomb, fear, not instant annihilation. Brigadier General Crawford F. Sams then embarked on a civilian career as a research physician with the University of California, San Francisco Medical Center, studying the general effects of radiation on societies, and specifically on the human nervous system. The atomic bomb didn't end war. It just hired a better advertising firm.